Okay, it's time to review You Season 2. No pun intended, but let's get started. First thing first, I remember saying how Season 2, or Season 1 actually, set up Season 2 quite well. And it certainly, got me hooked to the, show. And I was honestly, looking forward to see, what happens in Season 2. And honestly speaking, it did not disappoint, even though it may not have necessarily, felt the same as, Season 1, because, Season 1 was really what started it. I think season two was still, an enjoyable, season overall, and I think it was, worth the hype. So there's that. Now, first thing first, let's talk about, the whole Candace situation and how she shows up at the end of season one. Honestly, I liked how season two did not exactly, like pick up from season one or like immediately, get to that part of season one where, we see how she was alive. But instead, they slowly start, building towards it. So that way, I liked how they picked up from season one by not getting to it immediately, but like slowly getting there. I think there's that particular scene at the cafe where Candace and Joe were having that conversation, and I think it was a bit unclear about what they were talking about, especially what Candace was talking about. But then later on we learn how she never actually died in the first place. Instead, Joe attempted to murder her, which was what Candace was after, and that's exactly what she wanted the world to know about. And I think it was because the police considered it as domestic violence. Joe never really got arrested for that, and that's why Candace wanted to like get back at Joe by trying to like ruin everything he's got and ruin his life because of what he tried to do to her, and she never really got the justice for whatever happened to her. So that's fair. At least that way it was clear what happened to Candace. Let's move on to the new characters of the season. Let's first start off with Ellie and Delilah. I personally found them to be more or less a callback to Paco and his mother Claudia, just in a different way. On top of that, there was also a police officer who would visit Delilah, similar to how Ron would visit Claudia, albeit for different reasons. So there's that. Now, I do have to, say that, Ellie, she was honestly not that bad of a character. She surprisingly wasn't, that annoying either. And I personally found her as a better character than Paco, mainly because, she was a lot more involved in Joe's life compared to Paco. At times, I just found Paco to just be a very, sad character, which was, he wasn't a bad character overall, but he just seemed very sad at times, which, Ellie necessarily wasn't. So there was that. On top of that, I think Ellie clearly acted older than her age, which was, which we all can agree. For example, that time when she goes to meet Henderson to show him her film to start her career, and then it just came to show how naive she could be, and she even got like tricked by him in that particular scene. So I think it was also fair for Joe to also be there to watch her, even though she did not like that idea, but it was kind of necessary. Now there are also times I do have to say maybe because she acted older than her age, she would also make it difficult at times for other people. For example, that time when Joe asks her to like escape from the Queens, but then she would like make it so difficult because she just couldn't take other people's advice that easily. So there was that, but it was what it was. But that's really what I wanted to talk about Ellie. So I'm going to be talking about Joe's love interest, Love Quinn, and I'll also be comparing her with Beck because why not? Because both of them were his love interest, so I think it's worth comparing them. But I'll be doing that later. But I do have to say I liked how she was introduced because if I remember correctly, like Joe and Love happened to meet at that supermarket where which they both were also working at, and that's how they meet each other. But then later on, we realized that Joe actually, had it all planned, and it was his plan to, meet her in the first place. It's not like it happened by luck or something like that, which was interesting. Nonetheless, I just liked how both of them met each other and later on built their relationship. Honestly, found Quinn to be a nicer character than Beck, at least at the beginning, mainly because she seemed to be the kind of character who wouldn't actually break Joe's heart, which she actually didn't throughout the whole season. She did not, at least Joe did not have a problem with her, which was great. And now that particular scene might have actually just represented that they both will be together throughout the entire show, which at least that's how I interpreted it as, which was that dinner scene where she invites him for dinner, and then you know she roasts Joe a chicken, and then that chicken was supposed to determine her ability to cook, I think, from what she learned back at cooking school. And that was actually a pretty well cooked chicken. So that was probably supposed to represent the fact that they both will be together throughout the entire season. Hence that scene was supposed to be a powerful scene. Now, speaking of her cooking and even baking, I think sometimes you take it a bit too far by trying to like show her mood based on whether she wants to cook or bake, which was unique, but honestly at the same time felt a bit too much, and she felt like she was just overdoing it by wanting to, by showing her like will to either cook or bake. Now, speaking of baking though, I remember that particular scene which was a mildly intense scene, which was that scene where she tries to show, she doesn't necessarily show her mood, but she tries to like show how she feels about Joel lying about his identity by making it salty. That scene is just like, initially it seemed like a very pleasant scene where Joe was like trying to taste her cinnamon, but in the next moment Joe finds it salty, and that's when we realize that Quinn was mad at Joe for lying about his identity, which was fair. I actually found it exciting to see how Joe was going to get around in the new city and move to with a fake identity, which was the identity of Will Bettelheim, which I'm going to talk about in a while. Now, I honestly found it smart though. I will say that for sure. How he managed to stay under the radar with a fake identity, along with moving to a new city. So that way he tried to like make sure he was extra safe, not just like safe but extra safe. So there's that. Now, we all knew the actual Will Bettelheim was going to be in a classic jet glass chamber, because where else was Joe going to put him in? Now, speaking of the actual Will Bettelheim, I do have to say that he was annoyingly funny, if that makes sense. Makes sense, mainly because he would just say things in a way that really weren't that cool, but make them sound so cool. For example, when he was in the glass chamber, he talks about how he doesn't have any freedom, which is obvious, which is clearly visible. But then the way he hypes it up just made me well, like, what, he should just really shut up by now. And given the kind of character he was, it makes sense that only something like that could happen to a character like him. It was very ironic to see how he got knocked out by Joe, given that it was exactly when he says that a guy who looks like Joe is hard to be suspected, and that's exactly when that when he gets knocked out by him, which was a very ironic scene, yet it made sense because it's only a character like him who could experience something like that. Character whom I found to be annoying at times was 40 Quinn. I mean, the way he would say things in an over the top manner made me be like, just get to the point already. Otherwise, he was still an alright character. Just at times, he would get annoying like that. Now, that scene though, and where him and Joe get kidnapped and they have to go to the hotel to work on 40's script. That was fun yet quite an intense scene, as he did have to like save Delilah as well. So I was just wondering what, how's Joe gonna get to Delilah after like working with 40 on the script. Now, another scene that was quite an emotional yet an important scene, at least in my opinion, was a scene where 40 starts hallucinating, and then Joe learns that he actually murdered someone back as a kid. So that way it seemed as if Joe could somewhat relate to 40, and then he realized that he wasn't as different from him. So I found that to be an important scene for that reason. I have to say that Love caught me off guard by murdering Delilah, and even Candace later on. She turned out to be crazier than Joe, in my opinion. Even though she seemed to be quite innocent, but the next moment, she turned out to be as crazy as Joe, if not crazier than Joe. And this time it was Joe who got captured in the chamber instead of his love interest, because in the last season it was Beck who was captured, but this time it was Joe. So just interesting how the tables turn. And it was also interesting how both Candace and Love, who came, well, Candace came before Beck and Love came after Beck, and both of them happened to meet in the same season. More interestingly, both of them made Beck seem to be quite innocent, given the kind of acts they committed, because Candace tried to ruin Joe's life, whereas you have Love over here trying to kill other love interest, potential love interest of Joe. Well, one of them was his ex love interest, that was Candace, just to prove her love for Joe. And it was also just a mild surprise, I guess, just to see how it was the counselor from season one who got framed for Beck's death. So that way, it was clear that Joe certainly got away with Beck's murder. So Joe is not gonna be held guilty for that. Now, finally, as for comparing Beck and Candace and Love with each other, I have to say that Beck was a lot more simplistic and even a nicer character than mm, Love and Candace, and for that reason, as much as I liked Candace and Love for having that nice twist to them, which Beck didn't really have, I do have to say that Beck was a lot more innocent character and once again a simplistic character, which Love and Candace didn't have much of. Hence, I do have to say that I do miss Beck.